70 miles. That's the distance between a Chinese spy station and America's most secretive military base. Not somewhere in Asia, not the South China Sea, 90 miles from Florida. And the man now sitting at the top of U.S. foreign policy just told Cuba exactly what it will cost them to keep those facilities open. Stay with me, because what Rubio said publicly is only half the story. What he didn't say is where the real threat lives. I'm your host. Here's what's actually happening, and why it matters more than most outlets are telling you. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stood before Washington on Monday and did something no American diplomat has done quite this directly in decades. He named Cuba as an active forward base for both Chinese and Russian intelligence operations targeting the United States. Not a suspected base, not a potential threat, an active one. This wasn't a warning dressed in diplomatic softness. This was an ultimatum. And if you care about what's happening in your own hemisphere, drop a comment right now. Do you think China will back down or hold its ground? The facts Rubio cited come from a December 2024 report by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, one of the most credible defense research organizations in Washington. That report identified not one, not two, but at least 12 Chinese signals intelligence facilities operating inside Cuba. 12. These aren't commercial listening posts or telecom relay stations. These are military-grade surveillance systems engineered specifically to intercept communications across the southeastern United States and the entire Caribbean basin. And 4 of those sites have names: Bucol, El Wajai, Calabazar, all 3 positioned near Havana, aimed north toward Florida and the Gulf Coast. Then there's El Sao, 70 miles from Guantánamo Bay Naval Station, the same base running classified military communications every single day. Think about what that means for a moment, because most people haven't. Guantánamo isn't just a detention facility. It is a forward naval command hub. Encrypted transmissions, operational schedules, ship movements, aircraft deployments, command structures the U.S. military considers among its most sensitive assets in the entire Caribbean region. El Sao sits close enough to capture all of it. And here's what should genuinely unsettle you. The NSA considers 100 miles a minimum safe buffer zone for sensitive installations. Guantánamo doesn't have that. It never has. But during the Cold War, Soviet Cuba at least operated within a framework of mutual deterrence. China plays by entirely different rules. Beijing's intelligence doctrine is simple: collect everything, store everything, wait for patterns. Proximity isn't just dangerous, it's strategically deliberate. And this next part is what most major outlets have completely buried. Rubio didn't stop at China. He identified Cuba as home to the largest Russian intelligence base outside of Russia itself. No facility name this time, just the assertion, and a number that should stop you cold. Since 2022, Moscow has recruited up to 20,000 Cubans to fight in Ukraine. 20,000. That is not a trickle of volunteers making individual choices. That is nearly 2 full military divisions flowing from a Caribbean island into a European war zone. That is state-level coordination. Cuba's government isn't neutral here. It is actively partnering with both of America's primary geopolitical adversaries simultaneously from a position 90 miles off the Florida coast. If that doesn't qualify as a national security emergency, the definition needs revisiting. Now here's where the story gets more complicated and more important. Cuba's economy is in free fall. Inflation hit triple digits last year. The peso collapsed. Power blackouts became a daily reality for ordinary Cubans. The economy contracted for the 3rd consecutive year. The Cuban government doesn't host Chinese intelligence facilities out of ideological devotion. It hosts them because Beijing pays. And right now, that revenue is one of the few things keeping the government functional. Rubio understands this. which is exactly why his statement wasn't just a diplomatic declaration. It was an economic pressure point. The message was precise: choose Chinese intelligence money, or choose a path back toward American normalization. You cannot have both, and Havana has never faced that choice this starkly, or this urgently. Beijing responded within 48 hours. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian called China's Cuban operations legitimate, transparent, and consistent with international law. That word, transparent, is doing enormous heavy lifting for a network of 12 military surveillance installations that Washington spent years trying to get the previous administration to take seriously. Notice also what Beijing did not say. They did not deny the facilities exist. They reframed them. That is a non-denial denial from a government that knows its operational security just got publicly compromised. Russia stayed quieter. Moscow didn't rush to deny the intelligence-based claim, probably because denying the existence of your largest foreign intelligence operation draws more attention to it than silence does. But the recruitment numbers haven't been disputed by Havana or Moscow. 20,000 Cubans, uncontested. Here's the piece of context that changes everything about how you read Rubio's statement. He isn't a career diplomat reading talking points. He is a Cuban American whose family lived through Castro's revolution. When Rubio speaks about Cuba, it carries a weight that no State Department memo can manufacture. And he is making these statements not as a senator, but as the United States Secretary of State, the administration's top foreign policy officer, with direct authority to shape what comes next. The Obama administration tried engagement with Cuba. The Biden administration maintained sanctions but avoided this kind of direct public confrontation. Rubio just drew a line that neither of them was willing to draw, and he drew it in permanent ink. The history here matters too. China and Cuba established diplomatic relations in 1960, 1 year after Castro took power. Beijing recognized Havana before most of the world did. That relationship survived the Soviet collapse. When Russia temporarily pulled back from Latin America in the 1990s, China didn't. Chinese investment in Cuban telecommunications, ports, and energy infrastructure accelerated steadily. An intelligence infrastructure hides comfortably inside commercial projects. U.S. intelligence has tracked Chinese signals operations in Cuba since at least 2019. The year reports emerged about Beijing negotiating to reopen the former Soviet facility at Lourdes. By 2021, leaked assessments suggested China was significantly expanding its electronic surveillance footprint across the island. The Biden administration confirmed parts of those reports, then downplayed them. That calculation has now been permanently reversed. So what actually happens next? That depends on a calculation Havana has to make under maximum pressure. Cuba's leadership is not ideologically bound to China the way it was to the Soviet Union. This relationship is transactional. If Washington offers a credible path toward sanctions relief, normalized trade, and reduced international isolation, Cuba might move. But the Trump administration would demand verification. Intrusive, confirmed, American-inspected verification that facilities have been dismantled and not simply relocated. That is politically humiliating for a government whose entire legitimacy is built on resisting American pressure, which means the economic pain has to reach a threshold where national pride becomes an unaffordable luxury. Rubio's statement signals that is exactly the plan. But here's the question no one in mainstream coverage is asking directly. What if Cuba doesn't blink? If Havana calculates that Chinese payments and Russian support outweigh American normalization, the administration has to follow through on consequences. That means sanctions severe enough to accelerate an already collapsing economy. It means accepting a migration wave into Florida at a scale that creates immediate political pressure at home. It means explaining to American voters why tens of thousands of Cubans are crossing the water because Washington tightened the screws during an administration that ran on controlling borders. There is no clean exit from this confrontation. Rubio's personal history makes retreat politically impossible. And that makes the stakes real in a way that typical diplomatic posturing simply doesn't. There is also a broader question that Rubio's statement quietly opens. Cuba is not the only theater. Beijing operates ports in Panama, infrastructure across Ecuador, mining operations in Peru. If forcing Cuba to expel Chinese intelligence becomes a policy model, does it apply only to military installations? Or does it extend to commercial infrastructure that intelligence services routinely use for cover? That distinction matters because China will test it the moment Washington tries to define it. And once you draw a line, you have to defend it everywhere, or the credibility dissolves and adversaries learn exactly where your actual limits are. Here is what the evidence tells us with confidence. China operates at least 12 signals intelligence facilities in Cuba, including a site 70 miles from Guantánamo Bay. Russia maintains its largest foreign intelligence base outside Russian soil on the same island and has moved 20,000 Cuban recruits into the Ukraine war since 2022. Marco Rubio issued the most direct American ultimatum toward Cuba in a generation, backed by executive authority and personal conviction. Beijing's response was a non-denial. Cuba's economy cannot sustain itself without external support. The Trump administration now holds documented justification to expand sanctions or demand facility closures. And Guantánamo Naval Station sits inside the monitoring range of Chinese intercept technology right now, today, as you watch this. What we don't yet know is whether Cuba prioritizes economic survival over the appearance of sovereignty. Whether Beijing fights to keep those facilities or quietly relocates them outside American diplomatic reach. Whether the Trump administration has fully calculated the humanitarian consequences of maximum pressure on an already failing state. And whether this becomes a durable model for pushing back against Chinese expansion across Latin America, or a single confrontation that Beijing studies, adapts to, and routes around before the next administration arrives. This is not Cold War nostalgia. This is forward-deployed intelligence infrastructure operating in real time, 90 miles from American soil, and the man with the authority and the motive to do something about it just made his first move. Whether the next move belongs to Havana, Beijing, or Washington, we will break it down for you here, updated daily, as it develops. If this gave you something the mainstream coverage didn't, share it with one person who needs to understand what's actually happening in America's backyard. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time, because this story is moving fast, and we're not going to let you fall behind.